Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network. This is our special Sunday edition called Survive and Thrive with Dennae. Your host, Dennae Handford, will dive deep into chapter-by-chapter discussions on specifically selected books to help you make better decisions as an entrepreneur. Visit toughdecisions.net to sign up for our free weekly entrepreneur email. Before we get started, let's hear from one of our sponsors. Want daily interviews with real estate investors and none of the fluff? Go to bestevershow.com, where Joe Fairless interviews real estate investors and entrepreneurs daily about their best advice ever. Go to bestevershow.com.
Welcome, everyone, to the Sunday show of the Tough Decisions podcast. We call this Sunday show Survive and Thrive. Today, we're beginning a new book series and topic. The book is entitled Thrive. It's written by Arianna Huffington. This series is going to be a little bit shorter than the last one. I'm looking at probably 4 or 5 weeks here. And so I want to dive right into the book Thrive. This is a book that makes a case for what Huffington calls the third metric. And the third metric is the third leg of the stool of success, if you will. That's the analogy she uses. And she, talks about how if we view success as a stool, then pretty much everybody agrees that, at least for our modern interpretation of success, that, one leg is money and the other leg is power. But she argues that there really should be another third metric, if you will, or a third leg to the stool. Now, again, we are talking about success as it relates to the corporate world, business, professional lives. But, I actually think there's a lot of different ways to define success. And I think one of the most important ways to define success is whether or not we actually achieve the things that God has put us here on the earth to achieve. And, he talks about in the Bible that what we are here for is first and foremost to bring glory to Him. So that is definitely an important part of success, because if we don't achieve what we were created for, then it's hard to be called successful. That being said, there's a lot of different ways to bring glory to our Creator. And I think one of the primary ways that we do that is by functioning and working at our best and our optimal level, because He has made each one of us differently, and we all have different skills and abilities. And in order for us to bring glory to the Creator, then we have to use the things that He's given us and the skills and abilities that He's given us and do the best that we can with those things. So the question then becomes, how do we do that? And Huffington argues that really, success, though, while, power and money, those things are certainly tools that we can use. Really, we need to add an additional metric, and that's how we get what she calls the third metric. And this has become quite a movement. Huffington herself, as you may know, she is the founder of the Huffington Post, which is a liberal news media outlet. But she has also started what she calls the third metric conferences, where, people, they get together, usually large corporations, employees, leaders of those corporations get together, and they talk about how they can become more focused on the third metric. Now, she defines the third metric with 4 aspects, which she says are well-being, wonder, wisdom, and the ability to give of ourselves. Let me say those again. She defines the third metric with 4 different aspects, which are well-being, wonder, wisdom, and the ability to give of ourselves. And then she spends the book really talking about each one of those aspects and how we can improve those aspects in our lives so that success is no longer just defined by power and money, but it's also defined by this third metric, which you'll hear me refer to that term quite a bit. Whenever we say third metric, we are always talking about this additional way of defining success. And one of the things I really found interesting, and I guess I had, because I've never really thought about it this way before, but she talks about in the introduction how what happens when at someone's funeral, right? You have a couple of people get up, and typically they will deliver what we call a eulogy, or they will eulogize the person who has passed. What Huffington pointed out that I guess maybe to my shame I had never really thought about before is that when we think about the things that are discussed in that eulogy, and it's not, what their position was in the corporation. It's not typically how much money was in their bank account. It's not usually discussed about how many cars they had in the garage or how many square feet their house was. The things that are discussed in the eulogy are very, quote, third metric, as Huffington points out. It's about how much the person loved his family and his friends. It's about how much that person was able to give back to the people that they loved or the groups of people that they loved. It's about the third metric ideas that that person contributed to. And so the point that she makes is, if that's what we're remembered for, then why is it that when we're living our lives, we actually sometimes get caught in a position where we spend very little time working on those things and a whole lot of time working on the power and the money portions of the stool, but very little time working on the third metric portion of the stool, when in fact those are the things that are actually going to define our lives. And so with that, she launches into a discussion of this first aspect of the third metric. Now, the first aspect that she talks about is well-being. And she makes a case for the need for focusing on this by discussing the stress levels, and the actual statistics here are just pretty overwhelming. And we're not going to take the time to dive into all of the statistics, but just we can leave it at the fact that many, many, many people, probably more than we realize, are overwhelmed, they're stressed, they're anxious, they're depressed, you name it, and they are that condition because of their job or because of what they do. And the pressure to succeed and the pressure to produce in these positions is sometimes, and very often, it is overwhelming because so much is required. And what we find is that a lot of the sicknesses and the illnesses that are very harmful to our communities are actually caused by our jobs. And it's not necessarily that the job is too hard or that the job can't be done, but it's the amount of time and the demands that we put on ourselves in that position without to the point of neglecting other things that are very, very important. And so she actually says that there are 3 different ways or 3 things that we can do to help ensure that while we are giving a lot to a job or to a vision, whether it be our own or for someone else's vision, then there are 3 things that we can do to help make sure that we are also looking out for our own well-being. Now, this is not to be considered a selfish thing because we are taking care of ourselves. That's not selfish. The point that she makes is that there are now, and in modern day, we've begun to be able to study these things, that there are now lots of studies that show that what's good for the employees is also good for the company, and that these companies who take the time to invest in their employees and make sure that they are not just performing in their corporation, but also physically well, then that's actually really good for the long-term health of the company as well. So this is not just a selfish, I'm going to take care of myself so I feel good type of situation. This is, we need to take care of ourselves so that then we can give to the people that are around us. And most importantly, the family and the friends that we love, but also to our jobs and our corporations that employ us. So the 3 things that she says are important for well-being are, number 1, meditation, number 2, sleep, and number 3, moving the body. Now, meditation is kind of a broad word that, can encompass lots of different things. The main idea here is that we have to be able to stop and focus our minds so that we can reduce distraction. Now, as a Christian, I find it very helpful in focusing when I can think about Scripture and I can think about God's words. But even without that, it is a positive thing to be able to stop and focus what's in front of you and reduce distraction. There's so many things vying for our attention. I myself have recently tried to focus on reducing some of the things that are always pulling for my attention, Facebook account, LinkedIn account, text messages, email. It's constant. It's always something. And I thought it was interesting that one of the early leaders in Apple, obviously not Steve Jobs, but one of the early executives in Apple, did some studies about distraction. And what she found was people who were in front of the computer and in front of their email and working with technology were actually constantly just jumping from one task to the next. And as we've already talked about in multiple ways here on our podcast, your brain really doesn't function optimally like that. And it's just a constant juggling or skipping from one task to the other. We like to think that that's multitasking, but it's actually very inefficient. And our brains do not work very well like that. So at risk of, I don't want to rehash all of that, but just enough to say that she found, obviously, this was going on even in the late 90s. And those of us that were around in the late 90s would look at that and go, oh, there was really not a lot of distraction going on then. But there was. It's been on a constant increase since the development really of computer and TV and even back, I guess you could argue is back as far as the radio, but I think TV and computer really have accelerated it. So she said, we need to make sure that we control the flow of information, not the flow of information controls us. And so I've challenged myself to think about what I can do to stop and make sure that I'm in control of the flow of information that gets to me, not vice versa, because we can easily get caught up. Oh, this person needs me. I got to respond to this email and they need to know this right now. And all of a sudden we're not in control of our time anymore, but some mindless, technology app is in control of our time and our focus. We need to be in control of the flow of information, not vice versa. We don't want the flow of information to control us, because then we get out of control and then we lose track of our priorities and we become ineffective. So the value of meditation is the ability to step back, to focus your attention, and then reduce distraction. And we all need to be able to do that. Now, there's different ways to do that. One of the things that I choose to do is in the mornings, before I get going, I try to beat my kids up and spend a little time with some coffee. Dan and I usually spend some time talking, but we also spend some time in prayer. I do. And that helps me to reduce my distraction for that amount of time right there, but also be more effective throughout the day. And when I miss that, I can tell a difference. I can tell a huge difference. So there can be a designated time where you spend time in that meditation, but there can also be times throughout the day when you feel yourself getting overwhelmed, when you feel you're being pulled at from lots of different directions, then being able to step back, take a deep breath, and focus your mind again. That's all very important as well. The second thing that Huffington says that we need to do in order to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves and that we are contributing to our own well-being is sleep. Now, this is one that, you hear a lot of people argue about. How much sleep does your body actually need? And I do believe that people are different in this aspect. Some people, they just don't require quite as much sleep. But as a general rule and as an average, we require about 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. And if we go an extended period of time without that much sleep, it will have a toll on our body. There are several things, again, that you can do here to make sure that you're getting good sleep. One of the main things that we have learned recently is that the screens that we're constantly in front of, computer screens, iPad screens, TV screens, that type of light that is emitted, that blue light, can hinder our sleep. And so one of the things that we can do is just keep away from screens for at least 2 hours before you're ready to go to bed. Now, that is a challenge. That requires a huge habit change from many people. But one of the things that I've done recently is try to focus on keeping the iPad away from my bed and putting my phone down. Now, we actually have a little bit different arrangement because I actually have my kids' baby monitors on my phone. So I can't move the baby monitor completely away from my bed. I wouldn't hear the baby if she was crying, but I'm trying to put that phone aside and not look at it. And it's hard sometimes because it's right there. You just want to pull it over and just check an email again or look at Facebook again. But I know that that's not good for me, and I'm trying to change those habits. So putting it down, checking everything one last time, 7:30, 8 o'clock, and then trying to put it aside unless, of course, there's an emergency or something like that. Another thing that you can do with your sleep is you can set an appointment. Now, that may sound silly, but for those of us who are a little bit OCD about, keeping appointments and checking off lists and making those accomplishments, then this is a good way to sort of trick your mind into, oh, I've got an appointment for sleep. It's at 10 o'clock. I've got to be there. And even writing it down, if that helps you, putting it on the calendar, anything that you can do to make that a spot that, is not negotiable. A lot of times we make sleep sort of like the last thing, or whatever time I have left today, that's when I'm going to sleep. When really that's a detrimental habit to our productivity. We think we get more done that way, when in reality, we're actually really running our productivity into the ground when we operate that way. Sleep is so, so important. And again, Huffington in her book gives a lot of statistics, a lot of research. So I would encourage you, if this is something that you're interested in or wanting to look further into, that you do some study. Maybe grab her book. It's called Thrive, and read that section on sleep, because our bodies need sleep, and it's not okay to deprive them of the sleep that they need just because we think we're going to be more productive with one less hour of sleep. That's not okay. That's not an okay trade to make. Now, that being said, I do understand there are times in our lives when, sleep maybe we have to get by on a little less. But as a whole, that should not be our habit. And we should definitely look at that as a temporary thing where once we get through that period, then we go back to having those habits. I found one thing really interesting about, some of the studies that have been done, and it likens the brain to a dinner host or a host at a house. The brain can either be hosting and entertaining, or it can be cleaning up, but it can't be doing both at once. And what they have found is that sleep, during the times of sleep, is when our brain, quote, cleans up. It gets rid of harmful toxic proteins. It files and stores our memories. It assimilates new information that we've learned. And so sleep is super, super important, but we can't be entertaining and cleaning up all at the same time. And a lot of times we spend so much time and we don't give our brains enough time to clean up because we're entertaining and hosting and working and learning and adding new information, that there's no time for the brain to, quote, clean up. And actually what they have found is that this, in the long term can actually contribute to Alzheimer's and other, neurological conditions later on in life because we haven't given the brain the sleep that it needs. Something else that I find interesting is, I was doing some reading when we first started having children about the importance of sleep for babies. And several studies have been done that correlate. And again, if you know anything about science, you can't prove causation, but several studies have been able to correlate the sleep habits of infants with IQ later in life. And so when those babies have routine and they have plenty of sleep and they're able to rest, that correlates with a higher IQ later in life. Why is that? Well, because when they're sleeping is when their brain is actually assimilating the information. And, if you've ever watched a baby, it's fascinating to see how they interact with the world, but everything is so new. I mean, that every day there's something new, a first for them that they have to process and assimilate into the framework that they're building. And so sleep is super, super important because that's when all that assimilation goes on. And they may be watching and smelling and moving and feeling and, eating things for the first time, and all that goes on while they're awake. But when they're sleeping is when the brain actually does the work of, quote, cleaning up or assimilating and filing and organizing all that information. So sleep is very important, not only for infants, but also for adults. And we have to allow our brain time to file new information and clean up and get organized. And then, we can start again the next day with more hosting and more entertaining. So I would encourage you to think about your routine. Is there a way that you can get more sleep? Do you need to set an appointment for yourself? And do you need to get really, really hard on yourself about keeping that appointment? Do you need to get rid of some screens, get rid of some distractions at night? What do you need to do in order to make your body function more optimally through sleep? If you're not able to get more at night, it is possible to nap during the day. And these don't have to be long naps, but naps are important, especially if you are one that has to keep a very long day schedule. Allow yourself to take a 20 to 30 minute nap. it allows you to refocus. Similar to what we were talking about earlier with meditation, it allows you to remove distractions, get a little bit of rest, let that brain get some rest, and then you can be ready to do more. The third thing that Huffington says is super important for our well-being is to move our bodies. And one way we might say this is just to get regular exercise, but it doesn't even have to be super strenuous exercise. We do need to move our bodies. It can be as simple as a walk around the neighborhood. It can be as simple as a walk around the office, but we have to move our bodies. So what kind of movement are you getting? Because movement also stimulates productivity and it stimulates the brain, and it can make us more productive. I liked the idea that Huffington said that she had one day about having her meetings on a walk. And so what prompted this is that she realized that she was having all of her best ideas were coming while she was hiking. And once she realized that this was a pattern, she thought, well, why would I have a meeting sitting in a boardroom in a huge chair behind a computer? If that's not where I have my best ideas, why don't I start having as many meetings as I can out? We're having a walk, on a hike, if it's someone that shares that interest. And so she started doing that. And it was not only a great getaway, get out of the office, but in general, a more productive meeting, because stimulating the body also stimulates the brain, makes us more creative, makes us more productive. So I thought that was a really great idea. The other thing she said was, it's like there's nothing like facing a problem with someone beside you. And metaphorically speaking, you are doing that while you're walking. You're walking right beside someone and you're forging ahead. And so even though that's a metaphor for maybe working through a problem in the business or working through a problem with an employee that, you have to discuss, you're forging ahead and you're moving together and you're walking together through that. And so she said that kind of changed her framework and her way of looking at those issues that had to be discussed when she could get out of the office and face it on a walk with someone. So that brings us to the end of our discussion of well-being. We're going through the book called Thrive with Arianna Huffington. And this book discusses the third metric for redefining success. So we don't want to just define success by power or money, but also now adding this third metric, which includes well-being, wisdom, wonder, and the ability to give of yourself. Today we talked about well-being, and Huffington basically gave us 3 ideas for improving our own sense of well-being: meditation, sleep, and moving your body. Thanks for joining me for the beginning of our discussion of the third metric. I would love to know what your thoughts are on the third metric and what practices you incorporate to make sure you're functioning optimally in your personal and work life. Contact me at Dennae at toughdecisions.net or on our Tough Decisions for Entrepreneurs Facebook page. Let me know what you're doing and how you're incorporating some of these ideas, and maybe even share some of your great ideas with other members of our audience. I will see you next Sunday for our second week, and we will discuss the wisdom aspect of this third metric. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email, where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.